artists. We are going to be creating a sculpture today that is inspired by American Sign Language. Perhaps you know a person with hearing loss. People with hearing loss can communicate many different ways, and one way that they communicate here in our country is using American Sign Language. You may have seen this hand sign before. It represents a combination of 3 finger-spelled letters. I, L for love, and Y for you. And these are combined together to create a sign that represents all 3 words, I love you. Let's get started. The first thing that you're going to need to do is to gather some materials. You should have a slab or kind of a pancake of air dry clay. You should have a bit of water, a stick, maybe a toothpick type tool, a piece of paper. If you're here at school, you'll have some cookie cutters available, a straw, and your rubric. Let's take a closer look at the rubric so you know what our learning targets are for this project. First of all, students will create and smooth a basic hand-shaped form using a template that you're going to make and a slab of air-dry clay. Second, you are going to be properly attaching the fingers as well as the heart, and we'll be reviewing how you do that with clay. And then once the piece is dry, you'll be selecting a neutral color that you would like to use for painting your hand. And finally, we'll be adding some Mod Podge to make this shiny, and a wire or string along the top so that it can be hung. As always, you're welcome to use your own creative spin and sparkle and craftsmanship or excellence in how you put your project together is really important. The first step in this project is to create a hand template. We could go directly on the clay, but sometimes that can actually be really hard to kind of cut around your fingers. I think it's going to be a little bit easier for us to do this with pencil first, cut out a template, and then lay that flat so that we can focus on neat cutting. So you're going to take your hand and your piece of paper. You're going to spread out your hand just a little bit. And it's really important when we're drawing that we hold our pencil upright. If we angle it down in there, what's going to happen is that we're going to get some really misshapen, kind of super skinny fingers that aren't going to look much like your hand. So I'm going to make sure that as I go, I am holding my pencil vertically. I'm just going to go around each one of my fingers like this. And then at the end, I'll just attach those lines. Let's take a moment now to cut out our hands. We are going to focus on accuracy because we want for our template to be a really nice starting place for getting a hand shape. Once you have your hand cut out, remember you could have it go either way. That's up to you to be a left hand or a right hand. We're going to move on to prepping our clay. Now, when this is sliced, you'll notice that it does have some gaps. It may be helpful to use your little roller just to start to smooth out any of those little gaps. And then we'll also use a little bit of water to prepare our surface. Now, I may need to roll mine out a little bit thinner than you guys will because I have kind of a big hand. I think I'm just going to maybe cut this open to keep this a slab or a pancake. There we go, and I'm going to set it here on my mat. And I'm gonna see if I need to make it bigger. Oh, yep, I do. Now you probably won't need to necessarily do this step, but I'm gonna use my roller until I can get it the right size. Now that my clay is rolled out thin enough for my hand to be able to fit, I'm gonna set this on here, and then I'm gonna move on to cutting out the hand shape. Now, as I cut, just like I did with the pencil, it's important that I'm holding my tool straight up and down. I don't want to slice this way, or it's going to make my fingers look too skinny, or this way because it's going to make them look too wide. So I'm just going to focus on keeping it upright and cutting around the edge like this. Got my hand cut out. I am saving these little scraps for the heart that we're going to add later. This might be helpful to use. If you don't have much extra clay, I do have some available when we get to that step. All right, so I'm going to take this off. Let me just double check. I'm noticing that I didn't go all the way down right there. I'm going to take this template off and set it aside, and I'm going to use 2 fingers and a bit of water, and I'm going to go ahead and smooth this. Now I don't want it to be soggy and so difficult to work with that I'm not able to do our next step, which is attaching. So I'm just using a small amount of water, just enough to get a smooth surface. So if you remember from the introduction, the I love you sign has 2 fingers going down like this. And so what I'm hoping to do is to attach those 2 fingers to the palm. So I'm going to pull these guys up and I'm going to put them there for a moment. Now, when you do attaching, remember that you need to do first something called scoring. And scoring is when you are making little lines, kind of scratching into the surface of the clay, and you have to do both sides that you're hoping to attach. So if this is going to go right here, then I need to score here as well. Now, when you make attachments, a lot of times artists or ceramicists will also add what's called slip, and that's basically kind of soggy clay, wet clay, and you can make it just with a little bit of water on those scratched parts. Then you're gonna press, and I'm being real gentle because I don't wanna accidentally change the shape of my finger. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with this, and then I'm gonna take a moment just to smooth the texture on the top. All right, I am hoping to add a little heart here because this is the sign for I love you. If you're in my classroom, I do have a couple different templates to choose from. Another option is to just create your own template in the same way that we did with our hand. And you could just draw some sort of heart on here, cut it out, and that could be laid on the piece of clay as well to help you get the correct shape. Since I'm here in the classroom and I have a cookie cutter, I'm just gonna use that. Pop this guy out and then attach it right here. Now, when I attach this clay, I need to follow the same steps of scoring both sides of the clay and then adding water to create slip, just like this. Like the other surfaces of the clay, I'm going to take a moment just to make sure that this is pressed and attached, and I'm going to go ahead and smooth those corners as well. Artists, the last step in this part of the process while your clay is wet is to decide how you would like the piece finished and hung. If you would like for the piece to be hung using wire and perhaps decorative beads as well, then you're going to be using a straw and poking a hole in both this finger, pointer finger, and your pinky. And it's just going to look like this. It removes just a little chunk there. If you would prefer for this to be hung with a string, which could also be beaded, it can actually be passed under these fingers after it's dried and tied at the top. It's entirely up to you. No way is right or wrong, but we do have to decide today because if you'd like it cut, the clay does have to be wet. Go ahead and make your decision. Now we're going to let our pieces dry, and then we'll come back to talk about how we're going to paint them and finish them off. Once your hand is dry, it's time to paint it. We're going to be using a selection of acrylic paints. I have an area with a bunch of neutral colors that you can use directly out of the cup or mix to get your particular skin tone. And then I have a variety of acrylic paints that you can use to paint your heart. You're not limited to just red like I'm gonna do. You're gonna first do your skin tone, and then you'll move on to painting the heart like this. You'll notice as I painted that I was very careful to try and get the edges and not have any Swiss cheese or gaps in my painting. And I was especially careful around that heart so that I didn't end up with the paint getting onto my palm. I think we're ready for the last step. Artists, the last step of our process is to make our heart hangable. I mentioned in the earlier part of the video that you could do holes in these two fingers and we can string wire through. That is still an option. The second option was to add string and loop it underneath the fingers. For either one of those options, you are welcome to embellish with plastic beads as well. Here's my process. Students, this is how it turned out. You'll notice that as I was beading on the yarn, sometimes I did snip the yarn off if it started to unravel. We also have some plastic needles that can help you if you're struggling with that part. My last step for you is going to be to spray it with a clear coat that seals it all off, and then it's ready to say, I love you. Happy creating.